What if the guilt you feel every single time you finally rest, every single time you say no, every single time you dare to choose yourself, what if that guilt is not proof that you are selfish? What if that guilt is actually proof of how deeply you have been conditioned to believe that your needs don't matter? What if I told you that the most generous, most loving, most powerful thing you could ever do for the people around you, your children, your partner, your friends, your family, is to stop abandoning yourself? Right now, someone watching this is exhausted, not just physically exhausted, but soul level exhausted. You've been giving and giving and giving until there is nothing left. And the one moment you decided to stop, the one moment you dared to rest, dared to breathe, dared to say, I need this, you felt like a monster, you felt guilty, you felt selfish. But here's the truth that will change everything you think you know about love, about guilt, and about who you are. Your worthiness was never something you had to earn through suffering. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share will not just change the way you see yourself, it will change the way you live. What if everything you were ever taught about being a good person, a good mother, a good father, a good friend, a good partner, a good human being, what if some of it was quietly, slowly, and devastatingly wrong? What if the very belief system that made you feel noble, selfless, and worthy of love has actually been the thing silently destroying you from the inside out? Because here's what I see everywhere I look. I see people, brilliant, beautiful, deeply loving people who are running on empty, who haven't slept properly in months, who haven't laughed from their belly in years, who can't remember the last time they did something just because they wanted to. And when someone dares to suggest, maybe you should take care of yourself, they look back with this expression, this complicated, painful expression that says, how dare you even suggest that? People need me. And that expression, that is not strength. That is not love. That is a wound wearing the costume of virtue. Let's talk about guilt, because guilt is the silent weapon that keeps incredible people imprisoned inside a life that was never fully theirs to begin with. The moment you book that trip for yourself, guilt shows up. The moment you say no to that extra commitment, guilt shows up. The moment you close the door, turn off your phone, sit in silence, and just breathe, guilt is already knocking, whispering, you're being selfish, other people need you. Who do you think you are? And most of us open that door every single time we let guilt back in, like an old roommate we can't seem to evict, because somewhere deep down we believe guilt is proof that we care. We believe that feeling bad about resting means we're good people. We believe that our suffering is somehow proportional to our love. But I want you to sit with this for a moment. I want you to really feel this question land somewhere deep in your chest. Who taught you that your pain was proof of your love? Who was the first person who looked at you, maybe when you were very young, maybe when you were wide-eyed and desperate to be loved, and showed you, not with words, but with their actions, that the way to be worthy was to shrink yourself, to give endlessly, to put everyone else's needs in front of a line that never seemed to include you? Because here is the devastating truth. Guilt is not a compass. Guilt is a conditioned response. Guilt is what happens when the story you were handed about who you're supposed to be collides with the truth of who you actually are and what you actually need. Guilt is not God telling you you're wrong. Guilt is fear telling you that if you choose yourself, you will lose love. And that fear, that specific, particular, bone-deep fear of losing love if you dare to matter, that is where all of this begins. Now I want to talk about something that most people confuse their entire lives, and this confusion costs them everything: the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt says, I did something that doesn't align with my values. Guilt is actually useful. Guilt is the voice that says, I snapped at my child and that's not who I want to be. That guilt moves you toward repair, toward growth, toward becoming more of who you truly are. But shame says something far more dangerous. Shame says, I am wrong. I am not enough. I am fundamentally, irreparably flawed. And when you put yourself first, when you finally cancel those plans, when you finally say no, when you finally sleep in, when you finally take up space, and what floods your body is not guilt but shame, that is your signal. That is the alarm telling you that somewhere along the way, someone made you believe that your existence was conditional, that you were only lovable when you were useful, that you only deserved a seat at the table when you had served everyone else's plate first. And you carried that. You carried that belief like a stone in your chest, and you've been walking around so long with that weight that you've forgotten what it feels like to breathe freely. There is research, powerful, undeniable human research, that shows us that the people who struggle most profoundly with self-care are the people who have unconsciously tied their worthiness to their productivity, to their usefulness, to their sacrifice. They cannot rest without earning it. They cannot receive without giving something back immediately. They cannot be still without feeling like they are failing someone somewhere. And so they keep moving, they keep doing, they keep giving, until one day their body says what their voice never could, I cannot do this anymore. And the breakdown that follows, That is not weakness, that is wisdom. That is your truest self finally refusing to be silenced any longer. Here is something I need you to understand about vulnerability, real vulnerability, raw and uncomfortable and terrifying vulnerability. Putting yourself first is one of the most vulnerable acts a human being can perform because it requires you to say out loud, or at least to yourself, I matter, my needs are real. My exhaustion is valid. My joy is not a luxury. I deserve to be here, not just as someone who serves, but as someone who is. And that takes courage that most people underestimate because the world will not always applaud you for it. Some people in your life have been comfortable with your self-abandonment. They have benefited from your inability to say no. They have built their comfort on your discomfort. And when you begin to change, they will not always celebrate it. They will call it selfish. They will call it cold. They will say you've changed, as if change were an accusation. Let them say it. Because here is what I know about boundaries, and this might be the most important thing you hear today. Boundaries are not walls. Boundaries are not rejection. Boundaries are not cruelty. Boundaries are the most loving thing you can build, because a life without boundaries is a life that breeds resentment. And resentment, slow burning and quiet as it is, destroys more relationships than any argument ever could. Think about the people in your life who give with the most joy. Think about the people whose love feels the most free, the most genuine, the most life-giving. I promise you, those people have boundaries. They say no and mean it. They say yes and mean it. They give from abundance, not from fear. And their love does not feel like obligation, it feels like choice. And love that is chosen freely is the only love that truly nourishes. When you have no boundaries, you don't give more love, you give less. You give depleted love, exhausted love, resentful love, love that is secretly keeping score. Love that is secretly screaming inside, does anyone see how much I'm sacrificing? Does anyone even care? And the answer that comes back in the silence of 3 a.m. was what finally breaks you. You deserve better than that. The people you love deserve better than that. Now let me talk about something I call wholehearted living, this idea that it is possible to engage with your life with your full heart, not a fractured heart, not a depleted heart, not a heart that is perpetually at the bottom of everyone else's priority list, your whole, entire, fully alive heart. Wholehearted living is not a luxury for people who have easy lives. It is a practice. It is a daily, sometimes difficult, sometimes terrifying commitment to show up for yourself the way you have spent years showing up for everyone else. It means believing, and this is the radical part, believing that your worthiness is not something you earn, it is something you are. You were born worthy, you will die worthy. And every single day in between, no matter what you produce, no matter how much you give, no matter whether you are useful or productive or needed, you remain worthy. That is not arrogance. That is the foundational truth of a life that actually works. Because here is the paradox that will unlock something in you if you let it. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You have heard this, but I don't think you have let yourself fully believe it yet. Because if you truly believed it, you would rest without guilt. You would receive without shame. You would say no without apology. And you would really understand in your bones that choosing yourself is not the end of your love for others. It is the beginning of love that is real, that is sustainable, that is whole. The most selfless thing you can do is take care of yourself. Read that again. The most selfless thing you can do for your children, for your partner, for your friends, for the world, is to show up as a full human being rather than a hollow one. A child does not need a perfect parent. A child needs a present parent. And you cannot be present when you are running on empty. You cannot be present when you are drowning in resentment. You cannot be present when every yes you give is secretly a no to yourself. So here is what I'm asking you to do. Not tomorrow, right now. I'm asking you to consider, just consider, that the guilt you feel when you choose yourself is not the voice of your conscience. It is the voice of an old story, a story written for you before you were old enough to write your own. A story that says your worth lives in your usefulness, your love lives in your sacrifice, and your right to exist in peace must always be deferred until everyone else is satisfied. That story is not true. It was never true. And you have the power right now in this moment to begin writing a different one, a story where you matter, a story where your needs are not an inconvenience but an invitation to show up for yourself with the same fierce, devoted, unconditional love you have spent your whole life giving to everyone else, a story where putting yourself first is not the beginning of your selfishness but the beginning of your wholeness. And from wholeness, everything changes. Your love changes, your relationships change, the way you move through the world changes. Because when you are full, when you are genuinely, authentically, unapologetically full, you give differently, you love differently, you live differently. You stop giving from fear and start giving from freedom. And that is what the world actually needs from you, not your exhaustion, not your martyrdom. not your silent suffering dressed up as strength, your wholeness. So let us bring this home. We began with a question: why do you feel guilty when you finally put yourself first? And the answer, if you've been listening with your heart, is this: you feel guilty because you were taught to. You feel guilty because the world handed you a story, a beautiful sounding, deeply destructive story that said your value lives in your sacrifice, but that story has a cost, and the cost is you, your peace, your joy, your health, your presence, your wholeness. The guilt is not the truth of who you are. The guilt is the gap between the person you are conditioned to be and the person you are finally, bravely, courageously daring to become. Choosing yourself is not selfishness. It is the sacred, necessary, revolutionary act of someone who has finally decided, I deserve to be here too. Not after everyone else, not when there's something left over, but here, now, fully. You are allowed to matter. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to take up space, to say no, to put yourself on the list, at the top of the list, without apology, without explanation, and without shame. Your worthiness was never up for debate. It never required anyone's permission. And the moment you truly believe that, the moment that truth moves from your head down into your chest and settles into your bones, everything changes. That is not the end of your love for others. That is where love, real love, finally begins.